So most welcome everybody, good morning and welcome to Stockholm. I'm so happy that Stockholm shown itself from this sunny and bright side. We who lives here, we know it's not like this every day, but when you're coming, it's very nice, I think. My name is Anki Frikon. I work for the Swedish Public Employment Service, and I'm going to be your facilitator during the conference. And did you know that we have representatives here from more than 40 countries? Isn't that wonderful? So I think that we will have a good opportunity to network, to talk to each other, and exchange experience during these 2 days. So take the opportunity. Before we start, I would just tell you some practical details. First of all, you always have to know where the emergency exits are, and you can see the green signs, and also in the back of this room. Smoking area is also in the back of the room, behind the black curtains. We're going to have lunch and coffee and everything, and there is also a terrace where you can go out to smoke, or even if you don't smoke, you're allowed to go there. And also the badges. If you look at your badges, you'll see you have some letters and numbers on it. The first letter is the workshop you're going to this afternoon. You can find that in the program, the different workshops. And the number is the study tour you're going to tomorrow morning. And the third letter, if you have a third letter, it is for the post-event sessions. There is a free Wi-Fi in here as well, and the code is OECD and password OECD 2014. And finally, there is a hashtag for the conference called local job creation. So please tweet from here so everybody will know that we have this great conference in Stockholm. I think that is all for now. So it's start the first opening session, and that will be chaired by Mr. John Atherton, who is the chair of the LEAD since January this year, actually. And he's been involved in the labor market policy for more than 25 years. And he is also currently the Director General of Employment Program and Partnership for the Government of Canada. That's a long one. So most welcome up.
Well, welcome to the 10th annual meeting of the Forum of Partnerships and Local Development. I'm really excited to be here as I think really my second official role as the chair of LEAD. The first one was to defend our evaluation, which we should all do well, successfully, I'm told now. That's excellent. It's even better. I'm here with all my colleagues that could make it here today, including the vice chair, Anne van de Geys from Belgium. I think you're here, the vice chair of LEAD, as well as the secretariat and other members of the committee. I want to begin by thanking the Swedish Public Employment Services, the Swedish Association of Local Authorities and Regions, as well as the Swedish Ministry of Employment for hosting this fantastic event. And of course, the World Association of Public Employment Services for your involvement as well. It's with great pleasure that I introduce the theme of this year's session, which is job creation just ahead, building adaptable local labor markets. You know, I think this theme captures the hope of expansion and perhaps the worry that expansion will not spread evenly across our societies and across the places that we care so deeply about, because there are obstacles, and there are always obstacles to full employment, particularly at the local level, and particularly for youth and other disadvantaged groups. And in the spirit, I think, of both that hope and the idea of the potential risks, we've really created what I think is a dynamic and engaging program with just so much to be covered over the next 2 days. We have plenary sessions and panel discussions, workshops, all of which will examine the latest developments in understanding the links between skills, economic diversity, and local development, and of course, effective approaches to area-based partnerships and local governance, which is at the core of making things work on the ground. The networking session today, in particular, just before lunch, I think promises to be an enriching experience, as many countries and networks will share best practices and lessons learned on a multitude of initiatives and projects. I know this knowledge will have something for everybody with best practice and research from around the world at our fingertips. I'm sure we will gain fresh insights and new inspiration as we leave Stockholm. The LEAD program, for those of you who don't know a lot about it, and for those of you who may be here for the first time, it's a very important area of work in the OECD. For more than 30 years now, the LEAD program itself has advised governments and communities about how to adapt to global trends and tackle problems, but from a unique perspective, what I call a place-based or local perspective. Our particular interest is in the effective implementation of national policies at the local level, which means we take a multidisciplinary approach and a horizontal perspective in all our work, as I'm sure all of you do. But in taking this cross-cutting approach, I think three themes are always evident in our work. The first one is that context matters. History, the place, geography, and the experiences, the lived experiences of the people matter in designing and implementing public policy. The second thing is that we want to focus on what works, both from a program perspective and a governance perspective. And sometimes it makes it difficult to compare across places because we're so interested in describing for practitioners what exactly it took to make something work on the ground that I suppose pure comparative public policy is more difficult, more challenging with the particularity that we take so great pride in our committee. Finally, and of course most importantly for today, the critical importance of partnerships and why we're so proud of the work that the Forum is doing and why we're so excited about the work over the next 2 days. Indeed, I think the Forum is a fundamental component in the LEAD program because it opens the doors in a very real way between practitioners and policymakers from around the world and allows best practice to shine through with, as we were just informed, 40 countries and I'm told 300 members from around the world. The LEAD program this year is going to focus on 4 areas, all of which are represented, I think, in the agenda that you have before you. Making the implementation of employment skills and policies more effective, making our societies more inclusive, innovative, and entrepreneurial, bolstering local and economic resilience to adapt to challenges, and building capacities for local government. In addition to these exciting new projects, we also involve and have available a really impressive collection of completed research. So I think with this brief introduction, I'd now like to introduce our speakers. We have Elisabeth Svantesson, the Minister of Employment from Sweden, who will join us. Yves Leterme, the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD, and Zoltan Kazatchai, Deputy Director General of the Employment and Social Affairs and Inclusion from the European Commission. Our first speaker, Elisabeth Svantesson, has been Minister for Employment since 2013. She's previously been Chair of the Parliamentary Committee on the Labour Market and Vice Chair of the Bank of Sweden Tercentenary Foundation. Welcome, Minister.
Thank you very much. And good morning to everyone. I also would like to welcome you to sunny Stockholm and to this 10th annual meeting of the OECD LEAD Forum on Partnership and Local Development. For the first time, this annual meeting has been held here in Stockholm, and I'm very pleased and happy that so many of you like to come to Stockholm today. The Swedish government highly values the OECD and it as an important meeting place and a forum for policy exchange and policy development. Policy advice from OECD has over the years helped my government and many other member states to pursue sound policies in many different areas. The role of OECD in developing standard-setting international instruments based on member states' experience and values in such areas as employment and labor market, as tax information or environmental policy, and so on, has become increasingly important. In many countries, the labor market still bears scars after the deep and financial and economic crisis. Many countries have high levels of unemployment and under-unemployment, as well as rising long-term unemployment. The lack of demand, but also, I would say, the lack of sound public finance in many countries has hit job creation very hard. And youth, low-skilled, and immigrants have been hit the hardest. The work done by OECD is therefore very valuable. We need a good forum for exchange of ideas and experience, and a body that analyzes labor market-related issues. And I also think it's important to highlight how cooperation and on a local level can contribute to economic development, job creation, and making the labor market more inclusive. We often focus the problems and solutions on a national level, but we can also learn a lot from different local projects and cooperation. The work done within the LEAD program is therefore very important. The topic on this meeting and the agenda today are very up to date. For instance, how can local communities boost economic growth and and especially how can we reduce school dropouts and improve school-to-work transition? That's a question we discuss a lot in Sweden. We know that perhaps the most important factor for successful establishment on the labor market is a good start in the working life. The earlier you enter the labor market, after school of course, the better. And my government is fully committed to the youth employment challenge, and we are tackling this with a broad range of measures, both on a national and a local level. In order to enable young people to get better access to job, the government recently introduced a major reform here in Sweden. Following extensive talks with the social partners, we are now supporting employers to hire youth a new type of contract that combines work and training. The idea is very simple. We offer employers a subsidy and a grant if they offer a young person a job containing of 75% employment and 25% training. Finally, let me end this introduction remark by wishing you all a successful forum meeting. And let me also take this opportunity to thank all the organizers for this meeting, especially OECD and LEAD, of course, and the Swedish Public Employment Service, and the Swedish Association of Local Authorities and Regions, and WAPES. Thank you for your attention, and once again, very warm welcome to sunny Stockholm.
Thank you, Minister Svensson. Our next speaker is Yves Leterme. Yves is the Deputy Director General of the OECD and in charge of social affairs and education, governance, and entrepreneurship. It's a long list. Before joining the OECD, Mr. Leterme held a variety of political posts in Belgium, including serving as Prime Minister. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Madam Minister Svantesson. I hope I pronounce your name the right way. I'm still practicing for the future. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Deputy Director General of the European Commission, dear delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is of course also a pleasure and honor for me, together with the colleagues of the OECD under the leadership of Sergio Arzeni, to welcome you here at the 10th annual meeting of the OECD Forum on Partnerships and Local Governance, the OECD's worldwide, and looking into the room I can see that it's really worldwide, the worldwide network of local development practitioners. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that much of what we have to discuss today and tomorrow here in Stockholm, much of what we've come together to discuss deals with issues of transitions. At a policy level, so to say at our daily duty level, it is about what type of labor market policy response is needed as we transition out of the crisis. And how can local communities more specifically support the development of a workforce that can be resilient, more resilient in the face of future economic transitions. At the individual level, the level of our citizens, the questions are how can we better support young people more specifically in the transition from school to work, from school to the labor market, and what supports are needed during other times of life transitions, such as, for instance, between careers. Ladies and gentlemen, from a global point of view, the progress we've made recently towards sustainable economic recovery underpins all the questions. Advanced economies, the member states of the OECD, are currently showing some signs of a broadly based recovery, but fair enough, these signs remain modest and very uneven. An emerging market economy, the new market economies, are currently facing a slowdown and showing signs of vulnerabilities to the eventual normalization, the tapering of monetary policy in major advanced economies. Ladies and gentlemen, anyway, with an unemployment rate of 7.6%, 46 million people remain unemployed in our constituency. And while this represents progress since peak unemployment in April 2010, it is still over 11 million more people than in July 2008, 11 more people that are unemployment today. And youth unemployment remains particularly high at 15.5%, and in a number of euro area countries, in the southern part of the euro area, youth unemployment remains at 35% and even above. These are alarming figures. And while alarming, these figures only tell, in fact, a partial story, a part of the story of daily life of these people, as at the same time, growing inequality in OECD countries also remains a chief area of concern. Ladies and gentlemen, indeed, economic growth and declining unemployment rates alone are not sufficient to create widespread improvements in welfare. More attention must also be paid to the distribution of dividends of growth and opportunities among individuals and social groups. In particular, the high rates of long-term unemployment for many disadvantaged groups will increasingly complicate their integration back into the labor market if we do not address them head-on. To manage these risks, it is necessary to restore growth and create new jobs. And with shrinking public budgets, with the strict fiscal policy, shrinking public budgets that constrain the concrete responses that policymakers can take, action at both the national level and the local level is required. Addressing these challenges requires indeed a cross-cutting approach that links actions in one area, for instance employment and training, with benefits in other areas like economic development and inclusion. And as human resources and skills become increasingly important, become, so to say, the currency of the future, employment and training agencies are being called on more and more to be part of integrated strategies to support new job creation, to facilitate restructuring, transitions, and to increase productivity. However, it is not always evident how these calls to actions can be concretely implemented. Local economic and employment development has taken the lead in answering these questions, working to identify how more specifically local stakeholders and employment and trading agencies can best impact sustainable employment growth at the local level. Its research, the lead research, shows that a multi-pronged approach is necessary, including better aligning policies and programs to local economic development challenges and opportunities. A focus on skills as such is also needed through supporting the development of a skilled and adaptable labor force, helping employers better utilize skills, and supporting employment progression and skills upgrading. And these responses, These responses concerning training and skills must also be tailored to local growth sectors while also remaining cognizant of global trends. And finally, inclusiveness must be an integral part of all this work. What an agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, a focus on inclusiveness implies designing programs and policies that respond to the needs of a very wide variety of disadvantaged groups, from recent immigrants, for instance, to people living in poverty. Perhaps most pressing, however, are the needs of young people. And I refer to the unemployment of young people, the very high unemployment figures. Early exclusion from the labor market, as a young girl or guy, can have ripple effects throughout a whole young person's life, affecting long-term career paths and future earning prospects. While the rates of both youth unemployment and youth not in employment, education or training, the so-called NEETs, have increased since 2008, youth unemployment happily is starting to show some signs of decreasing, while the rate of NEETs is remaining fairly constant. The average NEET rate, so the people that are not in employment, education or training in the OECD area, is for the moment roughly 13%. It's too high. At the local level, actions need to be taken on several fronts involving a variety of partners. Most effective is preventing young people from dropping out of school, but attention must also be paid to re-engaging young people that have already dropped out. Ladies and gentlemen, young people are more likely to stay in school if they can see concrete connections between what they are doing on a daily basis in school and, on the other hand, the real world, highlighting the importance of creating smooth school-to-work transitions. Apprenticeships have once fallen out of favor. They are back on the agenda. Many OECD countries are re-examining the role that quality apprenticeship programs can play in smoothing these transitions between school and work. So, ladies and gentlemen, your work and the work of LEAD is critical, is very important, is critical to the OECD's overall response to these challenges and other challenges because of the focus of that work, its focus on implementation and local level policy delivery. So indeed, this forum, this 10th LEAD forum, is really an exciting opportunity for national and local players to come together, as both have to be part of the discussion of designing and implementing effective policies. Indeed, only through the combination of top-down and bottom-up approaches, we will be able to move forward on the road to recovery without leaving any communities or groups behind. And this is necessary, this is a condition to have a sustainable economic development in the future. And these challenges requires a joined-up, collaborative approach that brings together employment services, education, training, economic development, and so on. Ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I would like to express my gratitude to our Swedish host, Mrs. Minister, for the intense collaboration with the OECD in organizing this event and for the good collaboration as a whole. I would also, Mr. Kazatsai, would like to thank very warmly the European Commission, which has been partnering with LEAD for more than 3 decades already now, and without which this forum would not be possible. Ladies and gentlemen, the chair was referring to the evaluation. Well, I can say that the Forum on Partnerships and Local Development has recently been identified by our very strict evaluation committee as the OECD as one of the best practices for our organization. So your collaboration, our collaboration is clearly a very effective, a very successful one. I wish you 2 very productive days here in sunny Stockholm. And of course, I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary General Leterme. Our third speaker, Zoltan Kazetche, coordinates the management of the European Social Fund as Deputy Director General of Employment and Social Affairs and Inclusion at the Commission. He's a Hungarian national and has also served in the Ministry of Transport and the Deputy Secretary of State. Welcome, sir.
Minister Svantesson, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Deputy Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really happy and honored to be here today and I was really impressed by the number of the participants, not just the number of the countries, but the number of the participants who are sitting here and who will hopefully participate actively in the workshops which are going to come up later on. The 10th annual meeting of this OECD Lead Forum, which is about partnership and which is about, at the same time, job creation, as you can see it in the title, job creation just ahead, building adaptable local labor markets. This title reflects clearly today one of the biggest challenges we have to face. We all know that the economic recovery is having different peaks and bottoms. And according to the latest IMF reports, it is said that the economic recovery is underway. But this recovery is very fragile. And unfortunately, so far, it has not led to a significant increase in employment or the reduction of the very high unemployment rates. And this is something which we have to bear in mind when we put together our plans for the future. Promoting job creation and thereby a job-rich and inclusive recovery is essential. And it is indeed the #1 priority of the Commission. Partnerships have a key role to play in the creation of jobs. Jobs are the quality jobs which we are talking about, high productivity jobs which we have to talk about. Otherwise, it is a pointless exercise or meaningless effort from our side to put too much emphasis on the developments. Jobs that produce incomes to pay for goods and services that individuals want to purchase, for example, but also finance public expenditure, which is, I think, a key issue in the future, will have to come to be expected. High levels of employment for men and women, and Sweden, from this point of view, is a benchmark. Ensure productive and inclusive societies. The Commission continuously emphasizes the importance of effective and efficient social investment. All the more important for the many countries still facing substantial fiscal constraints in the wake of the latest Great Recession. At the European level, we have a powerful instrument to support this type of efforts, and many of you know about it already. This is the existence of the European Social Fund. Many of you, I know, could be or should have been involved in the previous exercises related to the use of the European Social Fund. So you know that there are strengths in it, but there are also weaknesses in it. In 2004, this year, we already are aware of the fact that a lot of new efforts have to be put into the implementation of the use of the European Social Fund. And we are now in the midst of the preparations concerning those programs where the final aim is to establish jobs, to establish decent jobs for everybody, to establish proper circumstances for social inclusion. And this is something which is going to move our economy ahead. We have to spend, and this is a burdensome exercise, we have to spend more than 74 billion euros for this purpose in Europe. And of course it varies from country to country, but this is not going to be an easy job to do if we want to do it properly. A key aspect of the new ESF framework is to reinforce the territorialization and the coherence between the ESF spending and the other structural and investment funds, especially what concerns the use of the European Regional Development Fund. And here, the partnership is going to be a vital issue. In order to reinforce territorialization and coherence at the same time, there are 4 mechanisms which could be foreseen today And these mechanisms are going to define the way how the implementation, what concerns the use of the ESF, is going to take place in the future. Number one is the integrated strategy for territorial development, in particular in favor of urban, rural, coastal areas. And in particular, we have to address the territorial features that can be presented in the partnership contracts and the operational programs to be sent to us these days. Another element of the four is the integrated approach to address the specific needs of the geographic areas. And we have to address here the issue of poverty or target groups which are at the highest risk of discrimination or exclusion. The third element in this regard is the possibility for local action groups to draw resources from different funds to finance community-led local development strategies, the so-called CLLDs. And the fourth element in this regard is the possibility to combine the European Social Fund with other funds, as I mentioned it earlier, especially which is what concerns the use of the European Regional Development Fund. This is how we intend to support, for example, sustainable development in the urban areas. And I saw some stands outside dealing with this specific issue. For the new programming period, the European Social Fund will continue support for local employment initiatives and territorial employment pacts. The community-led local development can be a very useful tool for empowering local communities, including the disadvantaged groups, including those local stakeholders who are taking the lead in certain questions, the NGOs, and for triggering social innovation at the same time in local level. In the context of the community-led local development, the European Social Fund could be used, among others, for the following purposes: providing access to employment for job seekers through training and measures. I heard some comments about that from the previous speakers. Improving the sustainable integration of young people who are neither in employment nor in education or training, which was Mr. Litterm referring to. Reducing early school leaving and the importance of providing the decent jobs for the youngsters. Madam Minister addressed it this morning. I think here we have to be aware of the fact it's not just about the individuals, it is about our common future. If we are not able to establish the proper and right circumstances for the new generations, then who is going to pay for our pensions? We also have to promote equality between men and women. And we want to combat gender stereotypes, both in the education and the training, and also in jobs. We have to reduce gender-based segregation in the labor market, developing female entrepreneurship, and promoting reconciliation of work and personal life for men and women. Developing individual pathways to integration and re-entry into employment for the people being far from the labor market. We also have to address the importance of integrating those groups who are, we used to call vulnerable groups, and they have difficulties to get proper jobs or to get closer to the normal labor market. I am referring to immigrants or people with immigrant background, or I'm talking about Roma. There are all sorts of differentiations among those who want to get to the labor market on the basis of different issues: sex, race, religion or belief, or we also have to address the importance of the age. We are living in an aging society, and there age is getting to be more and more important to handle. We also want to use the European Social Fund for promoting the social economy and the social enterprises. Other changes in the new framework regulation, which is clearly regulating the way how we have to use these funds, are designed to simplify the working methodology, the use of the funds, and at the same time particularly ensure that the direct beneficiaries are targeted, not just the institutions. There is better access to funds in general, and in particular for small local players. In this way, the European Social Fund will help in addressing the increasingly complex global challenges, which I just mentioned earlier. These challenges are really daunting, but while posing potential threats to us, they also contain opportunities. The Social Fund is a key instrument with what the European Union intends to promote concerning the ambitious objectives of the Europe 2020 strategy. These objectives, smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth, set in 2010 and established by the member states, have been made even more challenging by the aftermath of the financial and economic crisis. However, the longer-term challenges confronting Europe and indeed the OECD countries as a whole remain. This is why the Commission highly appreciates the efforts OECD made concerning the review of the state of play, concerning the evaluations they made, and our close cooperation now and in the future is going to aim at one single purpose: how to find a good solution to reduce the unemployment and to open up the labor market even further. With this in mind, and I know that you have a very busy day today and tomorrow, although it is going to be sunny, but hopefully you are not going to see too much of that during these 2 days. I wish you a very good series of meetings. It's not just about discussing the professional issues, but also getting in touch with each other. Make a good use of it. I wish you a good 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Director General. Well, that completes the opening remarks. I hope you'll join me in thanking all of our opening speakers. It was wonderful. And we'll turn the stage back over to our, I think it's Anne-Catherine who's going to, yes, good.
Here.
Thank you. I think we're, yes, I think so. I think we're.
Thank you so much. So now, I'm going to get you all to work for a little while. We're going to have something called a World Café. You have on your table 2 pieces of paper, one yellow and one blue. You can guess why we have these colors. And you have 2 questions that should be, yes, they are up on the board right now. The first question, and this is very much pedagogue, whatever you say, is this way. You answer the yellow question on the yellow paper and the blue question on the blue paper. So you should discuss around the tables for a few minutes. And afterwards, our hostesses will collect the papers and put them on the boards over there. So during the conference, you can see what all other people are thinking about these questions. So please go ahead.
Jag fryser ju ihjäl så att det kan jag ju inte få stopp. Ja, jag går och ställer mig i hörnet här. Linda.
would just like to have a roving microphone for me at the table because I don't want to stand up all the time.
You want to have a hand mic?
Oh, so you speak it. Maybe I ask somebody and then you take a... Okay. Good. So you will ask a couple of questions to people, so...
So, how are you doing? Did you get anything down on the papers? I'm really curious, and I want to hear what you were discussing. So, Nihal, if you just give the microphone to someone, I will hear what you said around the table over there. For the yellow question, what do you hope to learn from this event? Nadia, you can answer. Please stand up and tell your name and where you're from, please. It's not.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, you can. Well, Anke found me, obviously. My name is Nadia Dalla. I work as a social media strategist at the Swedish Employment Office. We only get to the yellow paper, I don't know.
But that's lucky for you, because that's the question you should answer now.
You think so? Well, we said that we want to find strategies on job creation. How can the social funds be used? We want to have new experiences. How can we use the web and the internet to seek for jobs? How can we help each other? That's what we just discussed. We didn't get any further than that.
That's
so very sorry.
good, I think. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And then we're going to ask someone over there what you answered on the second question. What needs to be done to accelerate local job creation in your country? Just ask the gentleman over here, Marie. Yes.
Yes.
You have to grab the microphone, please. They don't want to. Who wants to answer that question? No one knows. Then it's very good we meet here today. Here you have an answer. Very good. Thank you so much. Please tell your name and...
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Daniel Grima from Malta. So the first question was pretty, easy, but the second one...
Yeah, and you have to answer the
took
second
us a little
one.
bit more time. But the second one, what needs to be done to accelerate local job creation in your country? So as a team, we discussed, and we agreed to both answers. We believe that effective local partnerships, particularly with employers, could be vital.
Yeah.
And also creating niche market business opportunities. That would instill more economic growth in the respective countries, and thereby creating new employment opportunities. That's all.
Very good. Thank you so much. I think try to write something on the notes, and we're going to display them over there, and then you can get loads of ideas when you read there during our breaks. So thank you so much, and now it's time for the first session, Job Creation Just Ahead. And here we have Mr. Sylvain Guiguer, who is soon coming up on stage, who is chairing this session, and he is the head of the lead division within OECD. Give him a big hand.
Thank you very much, Anki, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us in great numbers for this 10th edition of the Forum on Partnerships and Local Development. We have something new for you today. For the first time, we will present the results from the local job creation project, which is a project that we have been carrying out over the past 18 months in 12 countries so far, trying to understand how labor market policy can best impact on job creation. And we think what's interesting about this project is that it doesn't really try to assess the effectiveness of labor market policy. So, for example, we are not trying to measure the performance of public employment services in connecting job seekers with vacancies. There are many other studies that do that and well. What we have been focusing on as part of this project is in trying to understand how best our efforts, all the efforts that we're investing at the local level in our countries, in human resources development, whether it is through the public employment service, whether it is through colleges, the vocational training system, the apprenticeship system, also the role of non-profit sector organizations involved in that, how they are contributing to create more productive, more sustainable jobs in more productive economies. As Mr. Kazatse said this morning earlier, this is what really matters at the end of the day. So how would all these efforts, how could they help us to bring our labor markets and our economies where we would like them to be? And how much we can rely on them in order to help us to tackle the challenges that will be ours in the future when it comes to creating more and better quality jobs in more productive economies. So if we had to redesign our labor market systems, our labor market policies and institutions in order to better tackle our challenges in building better quality jobs in the future, what would we want them to look like? Well, probably if we could redesign our labor market policies and institutions, we would like them to take into account the fact that many jobs today that are created are precarious in nature. So what's important is not only to have a job, but also to have the possibility to progress in employment. But that's difficult. That's difficult for our systems. And so we need to see how we can best prepare them to tackle this challenge. If we could redesign our labor market policies and institutions, we would probably also want them to take into account the fact that there's many labor shortages and skills mismatches. And today, those skill shortages are so huge that we are told that if we were able to resolve them, probably the unemployment would be resolved in our countries. If we were able to change our system, again, our labor market policies, probably we would want them also to take into account the fact that skills needs change quite rapidly. And it's very difficult to predict what the skills needs will be in the future, because we don't know what will be the jobs of the future. It's difficult to see what will be the new products in 5 years' time. So it's very difficult to anticipate those changes. Likewise, to accompany green growth, for example, it's very difficult to know what will be the skills that we will need. So probably the best we can do is to make sure that our systems are agile and flexible so that they can be used to seize the new opportunities which arise in the future. If we were able to redesign our labor market policies and our systems, probably we would want them to take into account the fact that most jobs in many countries that are created today are self-employed jobs. In the UK, in the United States, over the past few years, and in many other countries, most of the jobs created have been self-employed. In the last quarter of 2013, in the UK, 90% of the jobs created were self-employed jobs. Of course, we're not talking about Steve Jobs all the time, but it means something for the way we are implementing and designing as well our labor market programs. If we were able to redesign our labor market policies and our institutions, probably we would want them to take into account that not only it's difficult for firms to invest in skills development of their employees, but also they don't use the talent that is available to its fullest capacity. So there's no need only to focus on the supply of skills. We also need to take care of the demand and to shape it and to make sure that firms will use the skills that are available in the best possible way so that they can improve their productivity and also improve the quality of the jobs that they create. if we were able to redesign our labor market policies, probably we would like to think that it's not only, so skills utilization is not only a way to increase our productivity, but it's the best way sometimes to innovate in our firms. So this field is very complex, and we are not going to redesign our labor market policies and programs today, but we're going to identify some gaps and weaknesses that we can correct, and some strengths in many countries that we can use as a source of best practice for ourselves in our other local economies, other countries, and so on. And this matches perfectly the spirit of the Forum on Partnerships and Local Development. So we will now turn to our panel. First panel this morning will take us through some of those results. My colleague Jonathan Barr will introduce us to the main, some of the main results. We cannot cover all the aspects of the project, but some of the key ones that will be useful for our discussion. And then we will turn to some of our experts who have been able to help us in developing these findings in some of the countries that have been participating so far in this project. Thank you very much. Now I'll turn to Jonathan.
Perfect. Thank you, Sylvain. As Sylvain noted, my name is Jonathan Barr, and I'm a policy analyst with the OECD. I will let you know that I am Canadian, and I'm from the Toronto area, and as such, that makes me a huge Toronto Maple Leafs fan. And I was very happy to see when I arrived yesterday at the Stockholm airport, this giant photo of Mats Sundin. And it reminded me of why Sweden is such a cool country. I should probably also apologize for that gold medal match. So it is an exciting day for us within the OECD, as it's the first time we're presenting the cross-comparative results from this signature project, which has been ongoing for the last 2.5 years. Oh, there we go. Oh, yeah. As Sylvain briefly explained, we launched this project to understand the role of local labor market policy and how it contributes to quality job creation and productivity. A key part of the project was looking at local practices and partnerships in selected case study areas, and the extent to which policies were joining up the employment service with training providers and economic development organizations to better match the supply of skills to demand. To build comparisons across the participating countries, we've developed a dashboard methodology which looks at 16 indicators across 4 thematic areas within each country. You can see from the graphic up here, the 4 themes are represented by the colors, and then there's 4 indicators within each. Today, I'm going to highlight the results for 6 of these indicators within the time I have. Within each indicator, we've assigned a value of between 1 and 5 to represent the relative strengths and weaknesses of the policy approach. We developed this dashboard by looking at a range of qualitative and quantitative information. We also consulted extensively with local, regional, and national stakeholders about the results, speaking with over 600 people across the 12 countries. This map here shows you the 12 countries that are participating in the project and for which we have the results today. You can see that we have a broad range of OECD economies participating. I should also just mention briefly that there's ongoing work in England, which will be added once it's finished, and it's also possible that more countries will join the project later this year. Across the case studies areas examined for this project, concerns continue about high levels of unemployment, which are placing pressures on the social fabric. As the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD highlighted, in 2013, 8% of the labor force across the OECD was unemployed. To put that in absolute terms, it represents almost 48 million people, which is about 5 times the population of Sweden. The local level is where jobs are created and destroyed, and some areas, as you can see here, have been disproportionately impacted by the crisis because of their skills and industrial composition within their local labor market. This is why new strategies are required to retool local economies and build inclusive and sustainable growth. The need for strategies at the local level also stems from the strong regional variations that exist within countries between the supply and demand for skills, which can create potential skills mismatches. National policymakers need to be sensitive to these variations, which can affect overall competitiveness and growth. Here we see regions mapped within the UK and Sweden into a high skill equilibrium, which is the white color, a low skill equilibrium, which is the dark blue, and then skills gaps and skill surpluses. Essentially, a high skill equilibrium is where there's a highly educated population whose skills are being put to good use by employers. A low skill equilibrium is characterized by poor quality jobs and generally low wages, and local economies can get trapped. And then we know what skills gaps and/or surpluses are. They represent an imbalance which may be impacting on local growth. We can see here from these maps clear differences between the northern and more affluent southern regions of both the United Kingdom and Sweden. In Sweden in particular, we see that areas which fall into a high skill equilibrium tend to have major post-secondary educational institutions. We see this with Stockholm, with Uppsala, with Gothenburg, and with Malmö. The evidence gathered from this comparative project has shown that employment and training agencies can build quality job creation and growth by boosting the supply of skills towards employer demand, adjusting to new areas of growth and opportunity, stimulating demand and productivity by better utilizing skills, and supporting inclusion. I'm going to highlight program examples along these 4 areas, as well as the 6 dashboard indicators. The first dashboard indicator that I want to talk about looked at the extent to which the employment and training system was geared towards employer demand. With this indicator, we looked at the degree of customization within the training system, the extent to which employers were involved in curriculum advice and program delivery, as well as the availability and accessibility of apprenticeship and other work-based training opportunities. As a reminder, again, we're assigning a value between 1 and 5, which is a measure of the strengths and weaknesses of the policy approaches being taken. And what we see here are comprehensive efforts to further involve employers more in skill development opportunities, including targeted programs to small and medium-sized enterprises, which we know face particular barriers. In countries such as the United States, Australia, and Sweden, industry representatives are being used as trainers. This helps to build credibility with employers and ensure that a curriculum is aligned with the needs of the labor market. We also see that employers can take a lead role in facilitating workplace training opportunities. While Ireland, you may have seen, received a lower comparative score because of its narrow-focused apprenticeship system, there's an interesting initiative there called SkillNets. SkillNets is a state-funded body that co-invests with employers, particularly SMEs, where they cooperate in networks to identify and deliver training suited to their workforces. A network of SMEs, which are sectorally based, is guided by a steering group of local representatives. In the Czech Republic, SMEs are targeted by the Getting Trained for Growth program, which offers workplace training subsidies to companies to hire unemployed individuals. While employer needs are critical, it's also important that we balance this with the needs of individuals. And we see that countries are focusing on flexibility within the training system to ensure that individuals can undertake after-hours and part-time courses while working. It's critical to offer individuals reskilling opportunities so they can remain relevant in the labor market. For unemployed individuals, we're seeing a policy trade-off within the training system between short-term and long-term interventions. Some individuals need longer-term skilling opportunities to get back into the labor market. And we see that in Ontario, Canada, with the Second Career Program. It's focused on reskilling individuals who have lost their job in the manufacturing sector. They're provided with subsidized training to go back to a community college for 1 to 2 years, and they're provided with up to $28,000 to go and undertake this training. And the programs are generally aligned with occupations that are in demand. We know that those communities that are bouncing back the quickest after the downturn are those that specialize in certain economic sectors but remain flexible enough to take advantage of new and emerging global market opportunities. Recognizing this, we developed an indicator which looks at the extent to which local clusters and sectors are identified, and then the degree to which the employment and training system gears towards these industries. And what we are seeing here is that indeed, cluster and sector-based approaches can be used as a way to better connect high schools with technical and vocational education systems to set out clear pathways connecting education to the world of work, in particular in local areas of opportunity. In Korea, for example, a number of key sectors are identified at the regional level, and then comprehensive strategies are then developed to foster growth in these industries. In Bucheon, which is a suburb of Seoul, the city's growth strategy has identified the importance of attracting firms through clusters that exist in the region. For example, in the lighting sector, you have companies such as Samsung and LG that are located in the city. And the city has emphasized the importance of intensifying research and development around these companies and these clusters and strengthening their linkages with the educational institutions. In Antwerp, Belgium, several sectoral networks called talent houses have been established to bring together educational providers and labor market actors, aiming at promoting smoother transitions from education to work. In Quebec, a province of Canada, regional niche sectors are identified and provide a focus for training and economic development efforts. We see that in better connecting the education system to the world of work, labor market information plays a critical role, in particular in providing youth and unemployed adults with information on new opportunities, the education required, and expected wages. For youth in particular, and this was talked about at the pre-event a bit yesterday, counselors can play a critical role in making them aware of their opportunities and the training courses, but also working with parents. Lastly, there's an important policy trade-off that needs to be considered when developing a cluster approach, and this relates to missed opportunities from promoting broader economic diversity. There's always a risk in picking sectors and focusing efforts on those. The first two indicators had more of a supply-side focus, but a new area for public policy involves stimulating the demand for skills by working with employers to better utilize how they're working with their workforce. Essentially, under this approach, when employers are reporting a skills shortage, it avoids rapidly developing a training course to meet their needs and first focuses on whether there's issues with the structure and organization of work within the company. So we looked at the extent to which the public sector undertakes this work across the countries participating for our study with employers. And as you can see, there's overall low public sector involvement in this area. This is represented by the low scores you see here. In general, most countries received below 3. In general, this type of work is viewed as a private sector responsibility. Furthermore, there's a credibility gap that often exists when it comes to the public sector advising employers on how to use their workforce. But what we see is that when the public sector is involved, it can provide technical assistance and set an example. For example, in Australia, the Australian Workforce and Productivity Agency plays an advocacy role and works with employers to identify best practices and how they can undertake these efforts. The public sector can also work with local supply chains to stimulate innovation and help employers raise their game and become more competitive. For example, in Niagara Falls, Canada, the local community college there works with the wine sector to undertake applied research to upgrade products and production processes, stimulating overall job quality. I know most of you have probably not heard of Niagara Falls, let alone drank the wine there. Maybe one day you will because of these efforts, because what's happening is, by the community college working with the wine industry, they're gonna make better wine, which leads to greater export opportunities, greater sales, and greater profitability, which creates job creation at the local level, and also has the economic development spin-off benefits for the local community. Lastly, management and leadership programs can be put in place. In Northern Ireland, the Department for Employment and Learning provides a suite of programs focused on management and leadership development, all delivered under a Made, Not Born banner. Essentially, these programs, they recognize that better management matters. Better managers make better employees. We've also seen, following the crisis, that certain disadvantaged groups have been disproportionately impacted, such as youth and immigrants. Therefore, we looked at the degree to which programs and policies specifically target at-risk groups, which are always different within a national context, and then the extent to which impacts and outcomes are evaluated. Here we see relatively high values across most of the countries that participated in the study. And what we're seeing is that many countries are indeed designing policies targeted to specific people and places. For example, in Sweden, we see the Younga In project, which launched in response to the riots in Stockholm and Malmö last summer. The project targets dropouts who have not participating in employment and skills programs. The goal of the project is to give young people greater ambition and motivation to participate in the labor market. Participants meet with staff in a job garage, where they're provided with counseling and mentorship opportunities in a more informal setting. Which makes this approach quite interesting is that most of the staff are actually youth, which helps when giving advice and helps the at-risk youth relate to them better. In Israel, 21 employment orientation centers have been created as a one-stop shop for Arab Israeli job seekers to provide training, job placement, and career guidance services. These services are culturally sensitive, and in particular working with women to connect them better to childcare services, which is a huge labor market participation barrier in Israel. In Northern Ireland, neighborhood renewal is a cross-government strategy that aims to bring together all organizations working on issues that impact disadvantage and deprivation in 36 targeted areas 15 of which are in Belfast. They're responsible for developing and implementing agreed local plans, and they cover a range of physical, social, environmental, and economic regeneration activities. So I've highlighted a number of interesting local employment and economic development initiatives that we've learned about through our series of 12 country reviews. They clearly demonstrate that there's a potential for the local level to take a leadership role in job creation strategies. One consideration is that the local level can only develop strategies insofar as it is enabled by national policy frameworks. Based on previous OECD lead work in this area, which has highlighted the importance of flexibility within the employment service, we examined how much flexibility is provided across the 12 countries. When we talk about flexibility within the employment service, we're not talking about operational flexibility. We're talking about strategic leadership flexibility and the extent to which the local employment service can influence and adjust its strategic approach, program design, eligibility criteria, budget and performance management, and influence outsourcing arrangements. Here, the results are quite interesting because, as you can see, countries which are decentralized politically outside of Australia tend to have more flexibility within the public employment service. And then what we did is, taking the flexibility measure, we also assessed the degree of policy coordination and integration at the local level. By this, we looked at the extent to which the employment service works with training organizations and economic development agencies. You can see here that there is a positive relationship between flexibility and policy coordination, which suggests that injecting greater flexibility into the local public service, employment service could bring about reduced silos locally. The one outlier within our study is the Czech Republic, and Martin will touch upon why this is the case. At the low flexibility side, Australia is an outlier, and this reflects a specific initiative that was introduced by the government to better connect actors locally, a local employment coordinator, who is a government agent designed to facilitate partnerships on the ground. What we're seeing in terms of injecting greater flexibility and integration into the local public employment service, there's several interesting approaches that are being taken. One is around the area of budget management. For example, in Flanders, Belgium, VDAB allows 15% of local budget envelopes to be managed flexibly by local employment offices to design programs and strategies in partnership with the social partners. In the United States, there's about 200 local workforce investment boards which manage employment and training programs at the local level. These boards are made up of employers, community college representatives, economic development actors, and other nonprofit organizations, leading to some innovative job creation strategies at the local level. Lastly, in France, employment pacts in the Île-de-France region, which is where Paris is located, bring together local actors to highlight difficulties and special needs of an area. The signatories, which are the region, the department, and the community, agree on common goals and action for a period of 3 years. So in conclusion, I just want to say that I've had the fortunate opportunity to travel to all the 12 countries and meet with all the local stakeholders, regional and national. I hope this presentation has provided some interesting practices that will serve as a basis for mutual learning today. One thing I do want to say is one factor which is common across all the countries and for which international comparisons cannot be made is the amount of passion, knowledge, and expertise that exists. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I mean, you can see, this is a flavor of the results that we have obtained so far. Your country may have a low rating in some aspect, but it doesn't mean that it's not efficient, but we're looking at the broader picture of how to build better quality jobs. Now we will get into more details in a selection of 3 countries. Let me introduce to you our panel. We have Thomas Townsend from the University of Ottawa, who has worked with us to shape the results from the study for Canada. Lars Niklasen from the University of Linköping in Sweden, who has worked with us in Sweden. And Martin Bakula from the National Training Fund in the Czech Republic. And in order to exercise the patience of our Swedish audience here, I will give the floor to Thomas first to give us a flavor of some of the strengths and weaknesses of the Canadian system.
Thank you. Can I start with a little bit of geography. Canada is often referred to as a country with a population that wrestles against the dispersing effects of its geography. There are a couple of things with this project. One is that we have the dubious distinction of having the heaviest carbon footprint of any of the studies undertaken at LEED, largely because of the great distances between the locations we studied. 4 localities, 2 in Quebec, 2 in Ontario. This involved 2 languages and several dialects of bureaucraties between 3 orders of government. That was my lame attempt at humor. There's more coming, so lighten up. Okay, so in Quebec, you have 17 administrative areas, all uniform, working with a common civil code and a uniform administrative structure in each of those regions. Ontario is more organic. There are uneven regions between its various ministries, and you have a large distinction between central Ontario, characterized by Toronto, and northern Ontario, just characterized by Thunder Bay. To give you an appreciation of Thunder Bay, this is a population of 250,000, occupying a landmass that's greater than France, and it would be the rough equivalent between Toronto, which is the provincial capital, and Thunder Bay, of having the Stockholm, the regional office that administers Stockholm, located in Budapest. So, okay, three slides, 3 points. Not theology, it's just the number of active things I can keep in my memory. So, all 4 of these locations are transitioning to new economies. Each of them has governments that have overlapping responsibilities, so that 3 orders of government, when you talk about employment, all 3 orders of government are involved in it. In economic development, all 3 orders of government are involved in it. Education is a little better by our Constitution as the exclusive responsibility of the provinces, and so you have a finer definition there. 2 types of approaches. One, a localized approach, bottom-up approach. 2 locations were involved in that. Shawinigan, that I won't speak to because the mayor of Shawinigan is here to speak to you later on some very fine efforts in that community. Hamilton, highly dynamic economic development group working in close collaboration with the Public Employment Services, and its close proximity to Toronto has allowed it to very effectively manage transition into targeted sectors in logistics, food services, and advanced manufacturing. In Thunder Bay, you have a collision of top-down approach in terms of a northern development project coming out of Toronto and local economic development coming from the area. In Sherbrooke, very much on plan with the niche areas identified with respect to the 17 administrative areas. So that's being administered largely in terms of a Quebec City-centered approach that's being executed locally in Sherbrooke. Do I have networks up there? Whoops, yeah, I do. Okay. Networks matter. One of the things that we found in all of the locations is that there's a very real difference between committee structures, in particular mandated committee structures, which is a preference of both national organizations and provincial organizations, provincial ministries, and networks. We see this most profoundly in Quebec, where a corporatist approach, basically in each of the 17 regions, there's a set number of committees that manage the activities for employment, economic development, social development, regional affairs, and a large number of other activities. you see that the committees themselves connect players from the distinct areas of operation. But depending on the relationships between those players, those committees may or may not form networks. In the particular case of Shawinigan, you actually see a different structure that's been developed locally that can be declared as both an effective, what we call distant link network, linking the players in the different sectors, but also a scale-free network where in fact you have large concentrations of connections between each of the members on the committee that can bring resources to bear on the local activity. And my last point is local capabilities and flexibility matters. Throughout, we discovered that the degree to which both the national government and the provincial government could devolve decisional authority to the local level, the better that the organization of activities in those local communities could take place. But in consequence, there needs to be effective decisional support and flexibility at the local level. Where we had 3 levels of government all playing in the same area, frequently the programs did not fit correctly at the local level, and it required a large amount of effort on the part of local players to make those programs work for them. In other areas, we had disparities between the amount of information and the capability at the local level to generate and use data to effectively support the decisions at that level. One of the profound consequences of a decision in Canada to abate the census form and making a lot of the social data in Canada available to local levels is that the amount of information that local actors have in order to make decisions has been greatly reduced. Particular example in terms of effective use of this could occur in the city of Hamilton, where you had the journalists, university people, employment services people, all working together to locate pockets of high unemployment and poverty and to create a local plan to address issues of poverty in that city that involved the bringing together of the 3 orders of government to create an effective plan that actually is having a significant impact on poverty in the inner city of the Hamilton area. So that's basically it in terms of the Canadian experience. Governance matters, certainly in areas where you have national, regional, and local governments working together. The degree to which those governance structures support that becomes critical importance. The whole area of networks, what we call distant links, linking the sectors, as well as the scale-free qualities, the density of those nodes, the connections of the individuals, and the way in which each of those individuals on various groupings can bring together assets at the local level to make things happen is very important. And that the degree to which governments can devolve flexibility and promote the self-organizing qualities of local communities increases the effectiveness of local job creation and economic development. And finally, the structures that support solid local government need to be supported by, in Canada's case, the other 2 levels of government in order to ensure that local decision makers have the information that they need to make sound decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. So 1 country, but very different practices in different provinces and also within provinces. So there's already quite a potential for learning best practices within the country, and also some of those mechanisms there can be used in others. So let's now turn to the case of Sweden. Lars, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I will try to give you a 5-minute tour of Sweden. And to begin right away with some background, just to give you the context. Interesting. The unemployment rate is quite high in Sweden, and it has been going up and down for a couple of years. I would not say if this is good or bad, since we have the upcoming elections, but from a researcher's point of view, Sweden has gone through a very interesting period of quite dramatic change of employment policy, social security policy, the tax structure, and so on. And this is the outcome. It's not just that the unemployment rate is high, but the employment rate is also very high. So Sweden is doing remarkably well in some circumstances, but is still having some problems that need to be solved. And they relate very much to the transformation of the economy. So you could also say that looking at Sweden from the outside, we have a legacy of much active labor market policy. This has changed over the last couple of years. You could say that we are seeing a convergence in Europe, where the Scandinavian countries are putting less money into this, whereas other countries in Europe are putting in more money into this. And we will perhaps see a convergence in the things that we do in the countries in Northern Europe. The big challenge is, of course, the transformation of the economy. And this was seen very strongly in the areas that we visited. In Sweden, we visited Stockholm, which is, of course, a booming metropolitan area. The problem is very much that there is a lack of skills here, but also a problem with the inclusion of immigrants and so on. And then we visited Gävle, which is more or less the reverse situation. A heavily industrialized part of the country that is under tremendous restructuring. Companies are closing down or moving out. They need to find new things to do. And of course, skills development is a key to the development of this area. So what I will try to do is to give you a number of examples that we found in these two places that could be adapted to other countries too. First of all, I would like to mention, in Swedish it's called yrkeshögskola, a higher vocational education, which was a new type of post-secondary education set up about 15 years ago. It is very interesting in many ways. First of all, it's run jointly with employers. So employers fund a large part of this, and the students in these programs do a large section of at-work training with the employers, funded by the employers. The rest is funded by the government, so it's provided free of charge for the students. They look for specific needs in the labor market and are extremely flexible. So they close down programs after about 2 years, and each year they have a review to see what are the most important skills shortage areas now, and then they award new contracts for this. So there are no organizations running these things. They are run like programs by other types of organizations. I hope this sounds a bit confusing, because it is really a very strange way of organizing programs, but highly successful, partly because it's organized in a very innovative way. So we describe this more in the report, and you can find them on the net and so on. Bra Före is a project which was co-funded by the European Social Fund, and they are typical of a range of programs where you work with SMEs to first make an inventory of what their skills levels are and what their future needs are, and then they work with the employees to give them training to come up to this level. They also work with employers in this northern part of Sweden to help them utilize skills better, which we find quite interesting, that they try to give advice and so on. We also found Ung Företagsamhet, which is an organization that allows students in secondary schools to set up companies. So they practice at entrepreneurship. They open a company, they make a product, they have fairs where they show these products. So they get the training in doing this and in handling the bureaucracy that is involved in setting up a company. A very interesting organization. Unga In we already heard about, which is this outreach activity, which is run in 5 places in Stockholm. Järvalyftet we added. This is a large-scale restructuring of some of the suburbs in Stockholm. So this is something completely different. Looking at a part of Stockholm where lots of immigrants live and seeing that some of the problems have to do with the housing that was constructed in the 60s and 70s. And there's a long-term plan to change the whole area, the housing, the living, the roads, railroads, whatever. It's a very interesting project by the local government of Stockholm. In Gävle, we found another interesting example, how the local government, which is of course a major employer, how they have as a policy that 1.5% of their employees should be of the kind that would regularly not find a job. So they want to be a role model and say, we will hire the kind of people who would not find a regular job. Finally, we found this networking arrangement called the competence platforms, which is the latest version of an arena where lots of organizations can meet. Since skills development is an area that is very fragmented, we have the national government operating through employment policy and also social security policy, some of these education systems, and then we have the regional governments involved, we have the local governments involved in education, welfare, paying for some of the unemployed, etc. And this is an arena where these people can meet and talk and develop joint strategies. They are the most recent. There are many older versions of these platforms ongoing, and interestingly, they seem to be very active in some parts of the country and not so active in other parts of the country, which makes at least myself as a researcher wonder why are they booming in some places and not in other places. But that seems to be a very interesting initiative. So, to say something about, well, let's call it policy opportunities. I didn't say weaknesses. Policy opportunities. We see 2 things. And one is that it's a very low involvement of employers generally in Sweden. So we say that the employers can be more involved in things like articulating their needs. They could be in these partnerships, and they are in many parts of the country, but they can be more involved. They can deliver more of these programs. They can deliver and fund them. Yrkeshögskolan, the example that I had at the beginning, is a very interesting case of how employers can be more involved and how the employers then become more satisfied with what comes out of these programs. They can also work more with schools. They can design career pathways. These are some of the things that Jonathan mentioned before, how companies and so on can have relationships and try to show what types of skills are needed and how that then leads into a job in these companies. So there are a number of things that employers can do. When it comes to the public sector, which funds a large part of this, most of this, as I hinted at, we see that the various organizations collaborate a lot, but they can still collaborate even more with each other, especially local governments with the employment agency and so on. They do many interesting things together, but we see more opportunities for doing things together and together with the employers. There are some interesting examples where programs for skill development are pooled and so on. I will not go into all of this, but there are interesting examples that can be spread across the country. They could also allow greater local flexibility. This is quite interesting that Swedish employment policy has a very national perspective. It's the national labor market concerns, which creates somewhat a tension with the local governments. But it seems to work out quite nicely. And there is some flexibility in the system, but we think that there could be more. So this was, in a nutshell, what we have found. The report will be available in September. It's almost completed, so we have a draft that we will circulate, and there is actually a short summary available at a table somewhere here, about 100 copies, if you like. And if you have questions or comments, feel free to ask me in the break or send questions and comments to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lars, for putting so well and diplomatically some policy recommendations for the Swedish government in this pre-election period. And now we turn to the Czech Republic, which has been a very a good laboratory for many countries in Europe, as it has been experimenting with many policy reforms and new initiatives over the years, and it still does so, setting up partnerships and reforming employment structures in the country. So, Martin, please.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I would like to share with you some of the best practices from the Czech Republic. But before I do so, I would like to say a couple of words about the context in which our research was carried out. Our research was carried out in context of quite extensive social reforms that started around 2008, and these reforms were driven mainly by fiscal pressures and were part of austerity agenda of the government. Basically, the idea was to make the social system cheaper. And part of that, these social reforms was an essential transformation of public employment services. Public employment services in the Czech Republic were originally conceived in early 1990s as a very decentralized system, where the Ministry of Labor was responsible for strategy, and the management of public employment services was integrated within the ministry, within one department of the ministry. But then we had 77 district labor offices, which were local level offices that enjoyed quite extensive flexibility as regards to program implementation. They had own legal personality. They had their own budget that they could decide on which measures they would like to spend it. In 2011, this system was transformed and centralized, and now we have one central institution, labor office, which has 14 regional branches. So it's that it was basically transformed from two-level system, or very decentralized system, to central system in one institution, and this transformation took place during the preparation of our research. So you can imagine that it was quite challenging to capture all the changes, especially in a project that is very much focused on public employment services and on the issue of flexibility. Yes. Okay. So now I will go to the examples. Nevertheless, we have identified many good practice examples in the Czech Republic. The list would be very, very extensive. So I selected only 3 themes and organized all the good practices under 3 main headlines. First one would be moving towards better policy integration. One factor that I have to mention is that in the Czech Republic we still have quite young local institutions, because during the era of communism everything was heavily planned and centralized, and the reforms of public administration were started in early 1990s, but some of them are not older than 15 years. For example, the self-governing regions were created not more than 15 years ago. So these institutions are still learning how to implement policies effectively and how to cooperate with new actors. European Social Fund has enormous influence on skill policies as regards, for example, strategic documents, availability of funding, management of project, and so on. But it also has a very positive effect on enriching the diversity of local actors. There are many, for example, NGOs and training agencies that were creating thanks to the European Social Fund. And as a result of this the new actors start to cooperate and learn how to cooperate. But we have already identified some very good examples in the Czech Republic. First one would be the Moravian-Silesian Implement Pact, which is a strategic partnership of entrepreneurial entities, schools, and other regional institutions. This pact is, of course, very much involved in developing employment programs in the Moravian Silesian regions. We have several representatives of this employment pact here, so you can talk to them and learn more about this partnership. Second good example would be the Human Resource Development Council in South Moravia. In the Czech Republic, we have 12 regional human resource development councils that are basically advisory bodies to regional government. And this council in particular is notable for its strategic management of human resources. Then we have identified in our report many project-based good practices. These practices have many of the projects are financed or co-financed by the European Social Fund, and one strong element of this project is building partnership. And this is the way how the actors learn how to cooperate. And a typical example would be an NGO that cooperates with labor office in working in deprived areas. We have identified several examples that is included in our report. Second theme would be developing skills linked to demand. I have to mention that our initial education and continuing education are not very well linked. As regards continuing education, it matters very much whether it is within the school system or outside the school system, for example, within the training of public employment services or free market-based institutions. The production of skills is increasingly certified, and these qualifications are linked to labor market needs in systematic frameworks. And it is one good example we have identified is the work of sector councils. that are employer-based sectoral organizations that are responsible for creating the national system of occupation and the National Register of Vocational Qualifications that helps to link labor market needs with qualifications. In our report, we have identified the variety of training opportunities. I included here two examples: self-selected retraining, that is a measure that intended for job seekers that can choose training agency and programs outside common PES programs, which usually do not reflect some very specific individual needs. And the second one was already mentioned, the program Get Trained for Growth, that is subsidized training for employees in potential growth sectors. The third theme in which I would like to share some good examples with you is supporting inclusion. In the Czech Republic, young people felt very hard the impact of the economic crisis, and the youth unemployment is rising more than in other European countries. One of the problems identified by employers is the lack of work experience. And here are two initiatives that try to address this issue. The first one targets students which are in the last stage of their studies in upper secondary education or universities that can be provided practical training. The second one is targets those who are already unemployed and also have a lack of work experience. This project is also will be presented here in this event more in details. Many stakeholders are unaware of the potential of public procurement for social inclusion, but we identified some really good examples where, for example, a city of most, which is a city in one of the most deprived areas in the Czech Republic, includes social goals in their in contracting of their construction services. They include as one of the criterion 10% quota for employing long-term unemployed. And these examples were collected and published in guide for other municipalities that can be inspired by that. And the last one is a child group project that addresses the issue of reconciliation of work and family life. And it is basically subsidized kindergarten operated by employers. I think that we in the Czech Republic have quite a good system of childcare facilities, but this measure especially addresses the issue of demographic trends, and which has impact on some areas in which it makes the childcare facilities unavailable. And so that would be all. More examples you can find in our report that will be published in May. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Martin, and thank you for raising the issue of integrating our employment and skill system with initial education And continuing education, this is key. It makes local governments more complicated, of course, but it's key if you want to address skills mismatch. Running out of time, but I think we should be taking a few questions, if Anki allows me. Maybe 2 questions. Who would like to ask rapid questions to our panel? Don't hesitate. Sergio Arzeni, Director, would you like to?
Well, Sylvain said that most of the new jobs come from self-employment, which means that the flexibility in the labor market is actually on the way, it's functioning. But I didn't see too much in your presentation the way in which a self-employment programs to encourage entrepreneurship among people are being implemented in those partnerships that you have analyzed. And nor I saw, although you mentioned the importance of internship in companies, when we talk about training, what I see is that in general, training carried out in companies work well. Take people from training into job. When training carried out in training centers, often take people from a training course to another training course.
Thank you, Sergio. Who would like to pick up on this? Self-employment, entrepreneurship? Yep.
With respect to entrepreneurship, both provinces have well-developed programs, but the mayor of Shawinigan is actually going to talk about the best one we saw. Employment and training, you're absolutely correct. The good examples we saw of that in Canada were associations between Ontario's community colleges and employers. So there were lots of evidence of a movement towards more employer-focused and more workplace-focused training. Canada, though, as a whole, is more at the beginning of that cycle than, well advanced.
Thank you. Lars?
Yeah, and we have more comments on this in the report, but you could say that the example of the higher vocational training points in the same direction that you are saying, that the more this takes place in companies, the more beneficial it is to the individual and so on. Yeah, so that would underscore the same point.
Thank you very much, Lars. Would you like to add something from the Czech perspective?
Well, I would say that you are absolutely right about the training. It is one of the problematic areas in the Czech Republic, and that the training doesn't take place in companies. It's in our report, but these presentations only picked up several examples. It's not covering the whole topic, but it's included in our report, which is one of the criteria, I would say.
Thank you, Martin. Jonathan, something that emerged from the rest of the countries?
I can just say on the issue of entrepreneurship, I mean, we looked across all the 12 countries, and within the employment service, typically there is an entrepreneurship program or a self-employment program, but the outcomes across the countries we've seen, typically the outcomes are not always optimal. But what we see in particular around the area of youth unemployment is that entrepreneurship and equipping youth with entrepreneurship skills is a critical avenue to help them not only create jobs, but get linked to the labor market. And the OECD has done a lot of research on this and recently released a report called The Missing Entrepreneur, which very much focuses on this issue. So I would recommend that people have a look at that if they're more interested.
We can say that there's increasing attention accorded to entrepreneurship in vocational training systems, but it doesn't mean that our employment programs are adapted to a situation whereby people have to create their own jobs. So that's a different issue, probably. Thank you very much. We have started the discussion, at least that was important. We'll have more opportunities after the break, which unfortunately will have to be a bit shortened than what was expected. Sorry
Yes,
about
but
that.
I think everybody needs a coffee now. I just want to say one thing, that if you did not yet decide which networking session you would like to attend later on today, you can read about them in this booklet from page 9 and onwards. And for those of you organizing networking sessions, you can prepare your tables if you want to during the coffee break. Except from the ones in this room, you have to do it later. So I'll see you at 20 past 11, please.
Most likely, probably we will be back at 20.